Guilty on all charges. That is the verdict in the mistaken rideshare murder trial. The jury deliberated for just over 2 hours and came back with a verdict of guilty on all charges, 3 charges: murder, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. The defendant in this case, Nathaniel Rowland, you see there on your screen, was accused of the murder of a young victim, college student Samantha Josephson, back in March of 2019, a little more than 2 years ago, after she mistakenly got into the wrong Uber after a night out with friends. Following the guilty verdict, we moved very quickly, immediately, to the victim impact statements and a sentence by the judge: life in prison. I have 2 attorneys with me as legal analysts to help break this down. We want to talk first, attorney Jeffrey Wolf, a criminal defense attorney, and also with me, Eric Faddis, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Gentlemen, so much I want to talk about, but I want to start with recency first. This judge had a lot to say. It was on him, incumbent on him, after listening to the victim impact statements and the defense's argument, to make a ruling of the sentence in this case. And he said more than once, and he even said, basically it bears repeating, in his opinion, this evidence clearly pointed beyond a reasonable doubt, he said, to the defendant in this case. So let me start with you, if I could, Eric. Have you seen a judge this unequivocal in his ruling that I agree with this jury and here's the sentence?
Yeah, Judge Ashley, as you know, all judges have different styles, right, and different approaches to making remarks during sentencing. Some judges are a little more dispassionate, a little more neutral, and don't really make comments on the weight of evidence or how compelling certain pieces of evidence were. That wasn't the case with Judge Newman here, right? I mean, he was pretty clear about his. I think he said that there was an avalanche of evidence against Nathaniel Rowland. So clearly, Judge Newman's mind was made up in terms of guilt, and that's consistent with the verdicts that the jury returned.
And he even went a step further, if I could, Jeffrey, because he said that you fall into a category, speaking to the defendant, of a person without remorse whatsoever, a person with a depraved heart. He made very clear what he thought of this defendant, who is now a convicted murderer. What are your thoughts, Jeffrey?
Well, I think that what Eric said is correct. He had his mind made up. He knew what he thought about this case. He knew it before the verdict came in. The verdict agreed with him, and he let the defendant have it in this case. He let Mr. Rowland have it. But he also let Mr. Rowland's parents have it, which I thought was a little unusual. He interrupted the mom. He yelled at the mom, told her she wasn't allowed to talk about the fact that she thought her son was innocent. And I was proud of his lawyer to stand up and say that is how his family feels. They did nothing here. They were accused of nothing. They can do this. And then he spent the entire sentencing dressing down Mr. Rowland. I think he could have spent more time with the Josephson family. I think they might have appreciated that, but maybe they all just wanted to demonize Mr. Rowland, who is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And I've never been one, and maybe that's the defense attorney and me coming out, I've never been one to say hit somebody in their head on the way out the door.
Well, that's a really great point. Absolutely. And, the other thing that I did notice, like you, is that he did interrupt. You're right. The mother was trying to say, I know in my heart that he didn't do this, and the judge had none of it. But he also made a statement that I think may go to where he was coming from. The judge said, you've asked for leniency through your attorneys, and that's not in my DNA. So this judge certainly did not mince words. So let's back up now. That was most recent. Let's talk a little bit about those victim impact statements. So the state had the opportunity. 5 individuals spoke and delivered victim impact statements. I'd like to listen now to a little bit of the father of Samantha and what he had to say in his victim impact statement.
With all this guilt and anger and rage and hatred, do I tell you that has this really affected me? Do I really share with you my deepest secrets? Do I tell you that I've contemplated suicide? So, several times over the past 28 months. He, the monster, has stolen this bright light, this enthusiasm of life out of me.
All right, Eric, let me ask you this. All victim impact statements are powerful, but this one, to hear a father say he couldn't watch videos of his daughter, that he contemplated suicide because everything that's been taken away from him, the 120 stab wounds that he knows she went through. How much of a difference or impact do you think that this father's statement had on this judge?
Well, I think the statement is obviously, it's just brutal to listen to, right? I mean, this is a father telling the court about how this horrendous event has impacted him. He's not going to have any other, birthdays with Samantha Josephson, his daughter. He's not going to get to see her practice in court like my family got to see me. And so I think what it shows is really the human toll that these cases take on the individuals involved. It's easy for us as legal analysts to sort of dissect it in a technical fashion, but this really were some poignant remarks from the father of a murder victim. Now, in terms of the effect it's going to have in South Carolina, when someone's convicted of murder, the mandatory sentence is life. And so I think that the judge had already come to a determination as to what the sentence must be under the law. So I'm not sure how much it affected the sentence, but certainly an important cathartic release, if nothing else, from the father in court this afternoon.
And, these victims on the victim statements from the victim's side did say, Judge, we are asking for the strictest sentence possible. What, Jeffrey, do you have any thoughts about those statements or the judge's sentence in this case?
I think that those statements are what you would expect. This was a horrific crime. And to know that that's what happened to your loved one, to your daughter, to your sister, to your girlfriend, that is what you would expect that family and those friends and everyone that knew her to be going through. And so they are exactly what you would expect. What I would say is that they probably didn't affect the sentence because the sentence was going to be affected by the crime itself already. This was an extremely aggravated murder case. This was not a gunshot. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was 120 stab wounds to a young woman. So this sentence was coming regardless. And, the defense asked for the 30 years to mitigate it down. It wasn't happening. I think they knew it wasn't happening. Her heart didn't seem in the request. And so I don't think that there was anything else that the judge could have done in this case. And you're never going to have a judge say that somebody could be innocent, even though a jury's verdict has come back. It was one of the things that was really striking to me about this was that, number one, we had the defense asking for a new trial based on the brevity of the jury's deliberations in front of the jury, which is inappropriate to comment on their jury service right in front of them. And then we had the judge joking with them on the way out and then catching himself and realizing he should say something to the Josephson family before he leaves the bench. This was a very emotionally charged situation, and the law and the lawyers and the judge injected themselves into it in a way that probably wasn't necessary.
There's so many things I wrote down as quotes, and one of the things I can't help but saying is the judge said, listen, the sentencing in this case is not difficult. It's easy, as painful as that may be. Again, the sentence in this case imposed by the court was life. And he said, for the remaining days of your natural life. Gentlemen, I'd like to now listen to the sister of the victim. Sydney Josephson is the sister, and some of what she had to say during her victim impact statement.
Justice. That's all I can ask for at this point. After discussing my sister this past week, and knowing nothing can bring her spunky self back except for justice, that's all that my family and friends and I want. Like most sisters, that's just the relationship we had, being spicy and going back and forth, knowing exactly how to push each other's buttons, made me laugh and cry. She made me remember not to take life too seriously. She was so funny without even meaning to be. With such plans for the future, her full ride to law school, and together we had plans to have kids that would grow close together, spend much time vacationing at our future beach house, and taking advantage of the life we thought we could have. Sammy always knew she was included with me and my friends, even when I didn't invite her, but always rallied along, and I loved spending time with her. I'm at a loss right now, and I can't even imagine how to put my emotions into words. Nothing will replace her. Nothing I can say will bring her back. And nothing that I can say I know will ease my family's pain and heartache. Every day, having to go through the same thing over and over again, with being forced to recognize exactly how we lost her and how she will not be with us. No one should have to go through the stress and sadness that we all face on a daily basis, minute by minute. I ask this court, and I ask your honor, to impose the strictest sentence upon him so he will never have this opportunity to do this again to another person or family, or to walk the streets as a free man, because he certainly did not let my sister walk a free woman.
And gentlemen, I certainly agree with you. The brutalness of this crime just really makes it unfathomable, and hearing these family members sharing with the court what they've been through, what they're going through, it's just a horrible set of facts. 120 stab wounds during which she lived. That was the testimony, that she was alive during that. It's a horrible crime. Guilty on all 3 charges is what this jury found. I'd like to talk a little bit about logistics with you, because we know if we start at the beginning, the jury came out, the verdict was read, guilty on all 3 counts for this defendant, and the defense then fairly immediately made their motions. And there were 2 that they said. First is, number 1, we want a new trial because of the brevity of the deliberations, which one of you mentioned already. And the second thing is that there was an insufficient basis for law enforcement to stop the vehicle, and the prosecution, they get an opportunity to respond. This was in front of the jury that this was said, and is it appropriate? It's not whether or not it's appropriate. The question I really want to ask is this typical that the defense stands up right then and there and says, we want a new trial, and here are the legal grounds that we're going to assert? Eric, if I could ask you first.
Yeah, at least in Colorado, and I know Jeff practices in Colorado. I actually know him well, so he's got a sense of this too. But typically, that motion is certainly not made in front of the jury. That motion may be made shortly after a sentence is handed down. Now, the motion regarding insufficient cause to stop Nathaniel Rowland in his vehicle, that's something that we handle way before the actual trial. That's not something that you raise at the end of a trial. Now, on the other hand, defense has to, preserve all of the issues that they may want to argue on appeal. So perhaps this was some measure by defense counsel to preserve certain issues that they intend to argue in more depth at a later time. But yeah, somewhat surprising to me in terms of the timing and the circumstances under which those motions were made.
And what are your thoughts, Jeff? Just noting that the judge did say on the record that he is going to deny those, that there were previous rulings made specifically on the sufficiency of the basis to stop the vehicle by law enforcement. And I wrote down, he did say, I respectfully deny these defense motions.
Yeah, and that's what judges do, right? Everybody has had the unfortunate circumstance of having to file a motion to reconsider a ruling to the same judge to say, please overrule yourself. It's very, very rare that a judge is going to do that. I think that it takes an extremely, extremely thoughtful judge to sit down and say, I missed something, and so I'm going to reconsider my ruling. And that's in general, okay? Now, in front of a jury, in front of a grieving family, right after a verdict has been read, it's just not going to happen. It was never going to happen. But I think there was something procedurally in South Carolina that required them to do that, because right before they did it, the judge asked, are there any motions from either side? The prosecution had none. The defense raised these 2 issues exclusively. So I think what Eric said is that they were preserving the record for appeal is astute, and it must be required in South Carolina, because I can't think of any other reason that you would ask a judge to overrule a motion to suppress that he ruled on probably 6 or 8 months ago, and then to question the jury's deliberations right in front of the jury. It had to make the defense attorney's stomach turn to have to do that, because judges in our state routinely tell jurors that if anyone questions your service, come see me. And then they're going to look at contempt of court charges here in Colorado. So this would be extremely unusual here. But again, there are so many differences in these procedures state to state. You have to assume that there was something in South Carolina that required these motions to be made. I don't think the defense did it just to do it.
Right. And Jeffrey, excellent point. We talk about that with all these different trials we're covering 4 today in 4 different states. The reality is the state rules govern. And so you're right. Those rules are what have to be followed. The judge asked, they made those motions. I want to turn our attention now to, again, some of what the judge had to say before he imposed the sentence today. And this was immediately following the conviction in this case. Let's listen.
And South Carolina is a wonderful state, a lovely place. And people from all over the country, particularly the Northeast, choose South Carolina because of its beauty and charm and people. And Columbia, for all of the same reasons. Because we live in such a wonderful state, such a diverse state, where there are opportunities for everyone, and certainly opportunities for you. And for you to have attended South Carolina State University, if your parents have given you as much as they gave you, and for you then, your life story to end right here at this point in time. Of course, your life story doesn't end, but this is certainly a stop along the way. It is a tragedy. And whatever tragedy that causes these demons to reside within your soul and spirit, I don't know. Maybe at one point in time, since this is not a death penalty case, they can be exorcised out of you.
All right, this judge certainly, again, very vocal about why he reached the sentence that he did reach. He did order life in this case as the sentence for this defendant. Jeffrey, any last thoughts, about what the judge had to say, and even commenting on, don't know what those demons are, but you've got them.
I think, and again, this is probably the defense attorney and me coming out, but it really, really makes my blood boil when a judge who is going to hand down a sentence like this feels the need, instead of comforting the family, the Josephsons, to let them know the justice system has worked, your daughter's murderer is going to go away for life. Instead of taking the opportunity to do that, what does he do? He tells Nathaniel Rowland that he has a depraved heart, that he has demons living inside of him, that he is evil. What makes a judge stand in that kind of judgment? They're not even allowed to return the verdict. They are there to rule on the law. It makes my blood boil. And that doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for the Josephson family. But what his father said, what Mr. Rowland's father said, that they are going through this together is correct. They are both losing their children over this. And the need of a judge to do that is beyond me.
And I have to tell you, listening to the defendant's father in this case, we know he suffered a stroke in the last year, plus the defense attorney explained that. It's heartbreaking. And one thing the judge also said was, in other murder trials over which he's presided, he has to say, especially to mothers who say as a child he never did anything wrong, well, that may have been as a child. He's not a child now. So, Eric, any last thoughts you may have about the judge and what all he had to say to this defendant?
I did have a similar impression as Jeff, but one thing that did stood out to me is the judge essentially said, "Hey, look, Mr. Rowland, you had a chance, right? You went to college, you grew up in this beautiful town, you have a support system, you have a family, and at least according to the jury, you chose the wrong road to go down." And I thought that was kind of a poignant remark from the judge. I do think that some of the allusions to demons and evil and stuff like that, I think that sort of runs afoul of some considerations about the separation of church and state and courtroom decorum and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, the judge kind of put out there how he felt, and Nathaniel Rowland will be spending the rest of his life behind bars.
All right, Jeffrey Wolf, Eric Faddis, I know you're both going to stay with us to continue breaking down all of our trial coverage here on Court TV. I do want you to know, while we do need to squeeze in a break, Chanley Painter is going to be live with us right after the break, because she is going to break down and share with all of us what she saw inside the courtroom. We'll be right back here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.